in the January 6th probe. This is something he's been trying to keep secret. Headed to the committee, the White House visitor logs. President Biden rejecting Trump's privilege claims over the logs. Biden, who is president, is doing what presidents do, which is exercise presidential executive privilege. That's something that Donald Trump cannot do. His own appointees to the Supreme Court reminded him of that with that stinging loss. And so the news tonight is that Biden is just ordering the archives of the United States to hand off these documents to the House committee with a deadline of about the next 2 weeks, which speaks to the urgency. Now, Biden is thwarting Trump on the executive privilege claim. So for those who are keeping track of how he's dealing with his predecessor, well, that's obviously another sign that, well, he's going to do things different and Trump's not president. Then there's the urgency here. As mentioned, this is going soon. There are Trump aides who we know are trying to run out the clock. 2 weeks, I can tell you, with the level of secrecy and high-level presidential decisions involved, is a very fast timeline. And then, for the investigation itself, this means new and more evidence that the committee did not have. And it goes to some things we've been reporting on, including some of the aides who were snuck into the White House. Who was there in and around January 6th, and on, of course, the day of the fateful insurrection? We know that Trump claimed there was some sort of grave national security risk as well as privacy concerns regarding who visits the White House. Well, that's a possible claim that sometimes, depending on the visitors, might be true. But given what we've already learned about the coup that was afoot, the grave risk may be to Trump's defense. Meanwhile, the trove of evidence the committee has is mounting. Thousands of text messages, 4,000 plus turned over by Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, which matters because we know that many people, including Trump's own children, viewed him as basically the only digital way to get to Trump, who famously eschews most email and text. The Washington Post already has some, which shows Meadows was texting with people that were trying to steal or overturn the lawful election that declared Trump the loser. It goes towards the planning for January 6th, how there were Republican legislators encouraged to send alternate or fraudulent slates of electors to Congress, the false allegations of election fraud. There's a message from Rick Perry discussing an aggressive strategy to have Republican-controlled state houses declare, quote, "This is BS," and send their own electors to vote and try to get that before the Supreme Court. A little reminder there to Mr. Perry, who may or may not be up on the history. The Supreme Court viewed every single Trump legal claim as so weak it never held arguments on a single 2020 case challenging the election results, let alone siding with him. The committee is subpoenaing 6 other people linked to that fraudulent electors plot that we've been reporting on. One tweeted in response, quote, "Kangaroo court speaks." Giuliani, who has been identified by his own colleagues as the leader of this, including right here on the beat, is basically linked to all of this as the committee is reconstructing his extensive role in pressuring those GOP-led states to help Trump, as the Washington Post put it in one opinion piece, steal the election. Giuliani is back doing what he did throughout the campaign, talking whether it helps him or not. That is not always a great legal strategy. And remember, Giuliani is speaking out while himself, he is under subpoena.
January 6th is nothing more than Russian collusion with another name and a new lie and a new set of crazy, exaggerated, it's worse than September 11th, It's worse than Pearl Harbor, it's worse than the Civil War, it's worse than the end of the world.
That's his claim, which, as you see, is focusing more on what he views as criticism or hyperbolic criticism. It doesn't get into the questions that he is going to face under this subpoena and potentially in court. What did he do? What did he know? Why did he do it? I'm joined now by former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, a federal prosecutor, and the Washington Post's political reporter Felicia Somez. Welcome to both of you. Joyce, your view on the above and the president, again, exercising the privilege that is only the president's to decide to free up this evidence.
Joe Biden's White House cast a little bit of shade at the former president when they announced that they were going to release these logs. They didn't just say that Joe Biden had found that there was no executive privilege. They also made the point that under current standards, because this White House, as have many previous White Houses, makes its visitor logs publicly available. They pointed out that under current standards, all of this stuff that Trump is complaining about would have been released. And given the Biden administration and the January 6th committee's prior win in the Supreme Court, which said, yes, records from January 6th should be turned over to the committee, they're important, it's extremely unlikely that Trump has any success here. This is all about trying to delay. And that's really the whole strategy here. That's the last leg that the Trump camp is on. Can we delay and hope that we win in November?
Mm-hmm. And Felicia, we've been keeping an eye on the visitor logs because while in a normal or routine period, they might not yield that much. You would expect allies and aides of the president to show up at the White House. We already have reporting suggesting that the conflicts over who could see the president over certain plots, including one that involved the military that Giuliani himself reportedly said would land them all in prison, is now a big part of the scandal. I'm curious what you think can be gleaned from who was showing up then.
Well, I think, you know, Ari, in 15 days, we'll see the committee itself will have these logs, and we'll see whether or not former President Trump was keeping meticulous track of these visitors, or whether, as was the case with his telephone records, there are significant gaps there, especially when it comes to January 6th. I think these records are not just, and the committee's work is not just focused on the attack on the Capitol. It's focused on this broader issue of an assault on democracy and, of course, the effort to overturn the election. So with those logs, we'll see who was in contact with the president in the lead up to that day, and whether this effort was actually orchestrated from within the White House. We're seeing, you know, this ring of individuals who have been involved in it narrowing and narrowing to the point where now the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, is appearing more often in news reports on this issue. So, you know, mark your calendar for March 3rd, because that's going to be a big day when we see just how much this may or may not have been orchestrated from within the White House.
Yeah, and while there are many issues with record keeping and allegedly clogged toilets, according to reporting, Joyce, there is an operational security part of this that generally makes the logs more reliable, because independent agencies, including the Secret Service, do this. You know, Felicia knows, I know from going to the White House in multiple administrations, you're not just dealing with political aides. You're submitting your information in advance. Every single person who walks in there, it's a security process. And so we would expect even the people who were snuck in, for example, we asked Peter Navarro about reports that his aides snuck in Michael Flynn after Meadows tried to block him, but that meant sneaking him in through security and still getting his info there. With that in mind of what these aides are saying, I want to show you and viewers, Joyce, what Trump's own lawyer and colleague of Giuliani, Boris Epstein, told us about this plot. Take a look.
Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani. We fought for the truth.
If the committee finds that fight for what he viewed as the truth involved forgeries, etc., where does DOJ or a criminal prosecution fit in?
Right. I mean, Epstein has now said that everything was orchestrated by Rudy Giuliani. Rudy was in charge. And that puts Giuliani in an interesting position. There's been back and forth reporting in the media about whether he's cooperating with the January 6th committee. But ultimately, the question that Giuliani is going to face is whether he's the guy at the top of the pyramid running the scam to overturn the election, or whether the former president was actually responsible and Giuliani was the lieutenant who was carrying out his orders. That's the choice he's going to have to make. It's what always happens to defendants in a criminal case. Do they want to be on the bus or underneath it when it comes time for a prosecution? But we don't know that DOJ is looking at prosecution here. Merrick Garland gave us a strong signal in his January 5 speech that he would look at everyone, no matter how high they went, There's a lot of interesting investigation about Giuliani already in the works. For instance, we know that his cell phones have been seized and are being reviewed. There's this whole investigation involving Lev Parnas that may reach Giuliani over Ukraine. So a lot of other information that could be used to convince him that it's in his best interests to cooperate. But ultimately, this is the question that we look at for this Biden Justice Department. The question is go or not go. There's a lot of mounting evidence of an organized conspiracy to interfere with government. At some point, you have to decide if you have enough evidence and make the decision about whether you're going to go or not.
Yeah. And Felicia, we've talked about the substance, the investigation, the privilege, the law, and the facts. As a national political reporter for the Post, I turn to you on the politics as well, because Mitch McConnell had to break with the RNC. Giuliani is dredging up a topic that some Republicans say here isn't where they want to be living at a time where, as we've reported, the incumbent administration, President Biden, does face bad other storylines on inflation, etc. What do you see politically here in a Trump gang or group? I don't mean gang pejoratively, just a whole bunch of people around Trump who seem obsessed with relitigating something that is A, about their loss, a reminder to everyone that the public went a different direction, and B, is about scandals, violent and otherwise.
Well, as we've seen in these past few weeks, Ari, the Republican National Committee has moved to punish two lawmakers, GOP lawmakers, who are participating in this January 6th probe. That sent a really clear signal to other Republicans to try to discredit this probe and stay as far away from it as they can. What's interesting is you have seen some pushback to those censures. Some Republican senators on Capitol Hill in the past week have spoken out. Susan Collins, some on the more moderate side, such as Collins and Mitt Romney of Utah, but also some, on the more conservative side saying, listen, if our party is relitigating the events of 2020 through this November, that's not going to go well for us. So I think there is some palpable fear on the Republican side. What I think is interesting is that we haven't seen as much messaging on the Democratic side about what this probe means and just what the stakes are in November. We're seeing, as you mentioned, this urgency now when it comes to collecting the visitors' logs and other documents. And so far, the panel has interviewed hundreds of witnesses, issued dozens of subpoenas, collected tens of thousands of documents. Eventually, this summer, if what we've reported plays out as we expect, the committee will take a more public step to present those findings. And then we'll really see, what happens in November if Republicans retake the House. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is going to be very likely to disband this panel. And so really, the panel right now, it's basically now or never to rush to produce whatever they can before November.
Right, and we've definitely seen some evidence that they've put out for various reasons. Whether they do the final report or something will be interesting. As Joyce knows, whatever they do, however voluminous the report, before it's released, I believe we'll get a summary from Bill Barr, just a couple pages that'll be 100% accurate, so you don't need to read the whole thing. It's just a legal joke for those of us who lived through that. Felicia and Joyce, thanks to both of you.
Thank you so much, Ari.
Appreciate it. Coming up, we have Democrats eyeing a new battle plan to get more aggressive against these mounting culture war attacks from Republicans. Newly revealed internal strategy memos from the Democrats note Republican efforts to elevate culture clashes regarding crime and immigration or a caricature of liberal woke policies can be alarmingly potent and can't be ignored. Documents suggest Democrats know that they can't simply object or always change the subject. Now, for a little background, progressive activists have been arguing for years that the Democratic Party had become too centrist and needed to wake up or get woke to wider concerns about structural racism and wider systems of oppression. And the party's moved left on some issues. It's also diversified its elected leadership. It's way more diverse, for example, than the Republican members of Congress. But conservatives have seized on a type of a critique of wokeness that positions it as a betrayal of populist working class concerns in favor of a more academic, elite obsession with, say, political correctness. Now, the whole issue is more nuanced, but the politics are real. And a look beyond America also clarifies that. Take France, which has long faced a potent right-wing movement that pushes anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and anti-Semitic policies. Now they have top presidential candidates seizing on this similar argument, pledging to stop the export of le wokisme. I'm not joking. This has French voters concerned about it and the supposed contamination of France by woke American ideas on social justice, as the New York Times reports in a news story today. So it's broader than MAGA. Democrats contend that that type of spin on liberalism, plus the outright lies back home on Fox News, is something to deal with. In fact, on Fox, it's one of Trump's most outspoken allies who says the president in 2020 was responsible for a lax environment that led to alleged looting. Well, the president then was Donald Trump. So to fix it, in her own propaganda, she just claimed Biden was president then too.
Biden now has the final word on what you should do if someone is protesting peacefully. Biden, the same guy who in the summer of 2020 decided that he would allow people to burn down, streets and businesses and create all kinds of problems.
And if that was a memory lapse, it's one that seems to only work in a single partisan direction. Republican Karl Rove says the legislative debate over Biden's BBB plan, which did not pass, itself somehow drives inflation.
Inflation is the #1 problem facing the economy today. And that is a result of what? The American Recovery Act that he passed last year and the attempt to pass BBB, the Build Back Better plan, I think have added to the deficit.
If you watch that kind of coverage all day and night, you're getting more than opinions about American government. You're getting a false version of events that didn't even happen. Same with the Biden infrastructure bill, which won McConnell's vote when it passed as a rare bipartisan breakthrough. On Fox, they just tell viewers that didn't happen.
Back in June of 2021, he started talking about his bipartisan infrastructure deal. There's nothing bipartisan about it. If it was bipartisan, it would have been passed by now.
Would it have? It did pass. In fact, 38% of Republican senators voted for it. It's the most bipartisan Senate vote on major legislation since Biden took office. Now, America has gotten more polarized, but back when he was president, Barack Obama said he might even feel the same way about himself if all he knew about himself were Fox's lies about him.
If I watched Fox News, I wouldn't vote for me either, right? Because, you've got this screen, this funhouse mirror through which people are receiving information. How to break through that is a big challenge.
That's Obama tackling the Fox problem with some Drake energy. The Canadian rapper famously said, "I'd share more of my story, but you wouldn't believe it. I keep it 100 like I'm running a fever. If I was you, I wouldn't like me either." Drake addressing haters just as Obama was addressing haters watching Fox.
If I watched Fox News, I wouldn't vote for me either.
How did Obama win 2 terms and a range of legislative victories against all of that? His top strategist, well-known Drake fan, David Plouffe, is here when we're back in 60 seconds. We are back with David Plouffe, Barack Obama's victorious 2008 campaign manager and an MSNBC analyst for us here. Welcome back, sir.
See you, Ari.
We showed some of the lies, and we showed Obama's very Drake-like thought. If I were you, I wouldn't like me either. Explain.
Well, sure. That was, a challenge that bedeviled both of his campaigns and the presidency, which is this alternative reality that, sure, there's a lot of people that live there, but it increasingly drives Republican primary politics. So it's a real threat. Now, of course, in a campaign, you have something called money to do something called advertising and create content. And so the question for 2022 is if you're running for the House, Senate, governor, your campaign should have a very good sense of the people who are actually persuadable, who are truly undecided, and maybe they are concerned about the fund police. Then obviously you've got your base that you have to turn out. So in a competitive House district, let's say it's 200,000 people already, maybe 160,000 of those people, we already know that they're going to vote and who they're going to vote for. So with that next 40,000, the true swing voters, what's your challenge with them, and it's really important to be honest about your challenges, but also to maximize your opportunity. So the answer to this question about how much the Democrats fight the culture war, that needs to be decided at individual district and state level based on those voters. But you have to understand, most of the people who are either turnout targets or persuasion targets are not watching Fox News religiously. But some of those persuasion targets are. And so they're getting polluted either because they're originally watching that or it shows up in their social media feeds. So you can't assume anything. And I think that's what he was saying, which is this stuff is powerful and it can stick.
Yeah, and it's interesting you use that word polluted. It's information pollution, and it moves down scale into other conversations and other social cues that, of course, people take as well. And you look at that and you say, you know, there are many valid debates here about the size of government, about trade-offs in COVID. We've covered that extensively from the beginning of the pandemic. You know, David, we had small business owners on who said that some of the more left-leaning policies in the beginning were too restrictive because of other humanitarian concerns and jobs and putting food on the table. Those are real debates. A lot of what Fox and other right-wingers and Newsmax, which has its own audience now, are leaning into are not real. And I say that taking a backseat to no one and being accurate and fair about the real part. Take, for example, these issues in Ukraine. They're tough. They're complicated. But if you watch Fox, you're going to get them through this filter.
What about this hysteria that the State Department went through all weekend? Joe Biden telling us, get out of Ukraine immediately. Was this a ruse? Was this whole thing an effort to take everybody's attention away from what Hillary Clinton did and what we know to be a complete hoax over this Russia investigation?
David, I don't know what she's talking about, but in this instance, neither does she. And so that question only works for an audience that actually thinks there's some other giant important story that amidst Ukraine and COVID and inflation and a jobs boom that still has to figure out whether the wages keep up, whether this recycled, misleading John Durham conspiracy theory, which we haven't covered because it hasn't reached the level of factual news, is the biggest story in America.
Well, Ari, it's a huge problem across the board. I think it's a bigger problem for governing than in campaigns because, you know, in a campaign, again, you've got resources to reach the people you need to reach. So let's remember, so Fox had the caravan in 2018. 2020 was all about MS-13 coming to camp in your backyard and kill your family. We dealt with Obama phones and all sorts of things, and Democrats had good elections there. In governing moments, what you just showed is the mirror that not just Fox viewers look at, but most Republican elected officials look at. It's their own personal Westworld, where they can believe anything they want, they can be anybody they want, and so it really is a disincentive for Republicans to cross that line because they know they're going to get killed. So in this campaign, you have to understand that there is going to be some voters that, again, even if they're not sitting there with a remote control watching Fox, are seeing this stuff, and good campaigns have data on those voters and can go communicate to them. A lot of those voters aren't going to be Fox, so you've got a clear opening to them. But your point about what people care about, that's the most important thing in this election, is which side do the voters say, who's going to care about my family, my wages, my health care? And I think Democrats can paint Republicans as, if they get power, all they're going to do is try and relitigate the last election, the past, not focused on your future. Then, of course, you can get to attacks on lack of health care. You know, they want to protect billionaires. They don't want to reform prescription drug pricing, all the things we know that's popular. But I do think there's a mega argument here. Listen, back in 2012, that was one of our core arguments. And, you know, we were trying to get reelected in a historically bad economic time, was if you give Romney the presidency and Republicans all the power, all they're going to do is spend another 4 years arguing about Obamacare. What we have to do is focus on how to implement it. So I do think that there's a way to turn this on them, their obsession about the Trump family and not your family.
Yeah, obsession. David Plouffe, thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Coming up in the program, I want to tell everyone